Bridgerton Season 3 Part 1 has recently been released, and I've seen a lot of comments from people saying that this season of the show felt quite different to what we've usually come to expect from Bridgerton, and I'd agree with that. Even when comparing it to the spin-off show Queen Charlotte, there's a slightly different feel this time round, with the first 4 episodes having now settled in my mind after the first few days. I thought I'd delve into why it is that this season of Bridgerton just hasn't quite landed the same. So let's get into it. Here is why Bridgerton Season 3 feels different. Just to let you know, this video will contain spoilers. The impact of splitting the story into 2 parts. One thing that many platforms seem to be doing these days is splitting their seasons into 2 parts. One feel like I mainly remember Netflix first doing it with Stranger Things, and You in 2022 and 2023, and since then it seems to have spread to nearly every large series that gets released. I honestly can't think of any other reason to do it other than trying to keep people subscribed for an extra month, and for the platform to try and make extra money, especially when looking at this season of Bridgerton, because there's only a moaning gap in between the episodes. So why the need for the break? This is something that I think definitely disrupted the flow of the story in the first part of the new season of the show. For starters, we only got 4 episodes, and the 4th episode in itself was structured like a mid-season finale. However, the pacing of those 4 episodes was something which just felt slightly off. Within Season 1 and Season 2 of the show, there were 8 episodes which made up the season, but it was written with the intention of climaxing and concluding in episodes 7 and 8 after watching a relationship develop and thus feeling like we witnessed a true connection forming and love conquering all, whereas what this season has had to do is write it with the intention of providing a mini climax and conclusion in episode 4, and then go back to the drawing board, and then redevelop the story in a completely different tone for the second batch of episodes. We normally have romance blossoming over 8 episodes with its trials and tribulations and challenges, whereas this time round we had that in 4, which made it feel a little unnatural, and like the chemistry wasn't 100% there between Colin and Penelope. There just wasn't that screen time and natural interactions to enable the relationship to develop. Plus, it also feels like in part 2 of the season the entire feel of the show is going to change, as it looks like Penelope is going to be uncovered to be Lady Whistledown, and instead of love blossoming like we've had in these first 4 episodes, it's going to be one that's focused on fear, jealousy, rivalry, and relationships breaking up. So the drastic change in tone is something that's going to be a little bit uneasy when it first returns, and it might take some getting used to. I just felt like the formula and structure of the episodes was so clear to see in this first part, and it kind of took away from the mystery because it all just felt a bit too predictable. It was all about setting up part 2 rather than allowing part 1 to have its own identity. So not only is the way that the story had to be written this time round being impacted by the gap, but the gap in itself is sometimes enough to make people forget about the show, and for there to be a drop-off from viewers, it's in the platform's best interest to keep the show front of mind. Maybe 4 weeks isn't enough for those ramifications to be felt, but I have seen other shows not get the viewing figures that they get in part 1 when they do eventually return for the second part. So hopefully that doesn't happen with this show. Penelope and Colin versus Penelope and Lord Debling. Penelope was caught in a triangle in this season of the show, and that was with Colin, Bridgerton, and Lord Debling. The funny thing is, despite the fact that her heart always wanted to belong to Colin, what Season 3 Part 1 showed us was that Lord Debling was probably actually better suited to Penelope. I know the show is about the heart conquering over the mind and Penelope wanting that true love, but maybe because of the lack of screen time of Colin and Penelope, it just felt like there wasn't really that strong of a connection between them. It just kind of felt like Colin only wanted Penelope because she became interested in Lord Debling. They had that kiss at the end of episode 2, which seemed to make Colin infatuated with her, which to me just didn't feel realistic, especially considering a mere matter of moments before then he had no intentions of being in love with her or wanting to marry her. He wasn't interested in the slightest, whereas with Lord Debling, granted, he didn't know if he'd truly be able to love her due to there not being much space in his life because of his work and his travels, but it actually felt like Penelope and Lord Debling had things in common, a true connection, and he admired her for who she truly was. He wasn't involved in the gossip of the town, and he seemed to respect her time and company. So the fact that the romance with Debling was written out was something that did surprise me. I get it, because Colin and Penelope are the story, and part 2 is dependent on them being together, but that kind of is the problem. The whole second part was relying on them ending up together, so it was like the effort wasn't really put in place to make it feel as real as possible, because it was just always going to happen. It would have been as simple as just giving them more screen time together for the romance to feel like it was progressing naturally rather than a random kiss, a dream, and then Colin becoming jealous. I think the idea of Penelope fighting for a spot in Debling's heart would have been a good story, her managing to get him to love her and find a space amongst work and travel, but alas, it just wasn't meant to be. I like Colin and Penelope together, don't get me wrong, but it just feels like they genuinely don't have much in common. So maybe part 2 will change that. The multiple romances, something that kind of ties into the previous point before, is the fact that there are multiple romances that had developing over the course of this season, and some seem to be more interesting than the main one in question. So we had Penelope and Colin, Penelope and Lord Debling, Francesca and Lord Kilmartin, and Violet and Marcus. The fact that there was a whole love story with Francesca over the course of these 4 episodes was something that was enjoyable to watch, but also at the same time, even though it was probably detrimental to the main love story that the show is centered around, it actually did the very thing that the main love story needed to do. It had good pacing, a genuine connection, and 2 individuals who looked like they actually enjoyed being in each other's company and cared for one another. The same could also be said for Violet and Marcus. They didn't have much screen time together, but in the small moments that they were together, there was flirting, smiles, and the start of what looked like a romance. So it just surprises me that the show managed to get it right with the 2 side romances, but then, with the main one, it just felt a bit more forced and unnatural. I'm down for multiple romances in a season, but if it comes at the cost of the main one, or it feels like they're stronger than the main one, then I think there's a fundamental issue at its core. This romance doesn't feel like Anthony and Kate, or Deffy and Simon, or even Queen Charlotte and George in the standalone series. It feels a bit more complicated, which isn't too much of an issue, but I think the show has to claw it back a little bit in Season 3 Part 2 for the love and care to feel genuine and not like some kind of jealous desire from Colin. These are the main things that a film made Bridget in Season 3 Part 1 feel slightly different to what we've come to expect from the show. I wouldn't say that it's made the show dip in quality, because it was still an enjoyable batch of episodes. It just felt different from a tonal perspective, and also in terms of the way that the romance was structured. I kind of like the threat of Penelope's identity being revealed and the Featherington estate being something that gets taken away from them. It adds a completely different layer to the show for the first time in its history, and I'm all for watching the drama unfold. With just under a month to go until the final 4 episodes of Season 3 get released, I'm intrigued to see if Penelope and Colin are going to get their happy ending, if Francesca will end up with Lord Kilmartin, and if Violet will be with Marcus and find that companionship that she desires. I guess time will tell. So there you have it, why Bridgerton Season 3 feels different. If you want to see more videos on Bridgerton, such as a full breakdown of Season 3 Part 1, or the trailer explained for Part 2, along with my theories, then click on the card in the top corner, or alternatively, you can head over to my channel where you'll find them all. Do you think Bridgerton Season 3 Part 1 feels different? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. As always, thanks for tuning into the video, and I'll see you in the next one.